Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So we have some questions, not many questions, but they're big questions. So we'll try to take our time to do them justice, inshallah. In no particular order and completely anonymous, the first question is, can you please explain the proper way of how a widow must observe the iddah, the period of mourning after losing one's spouse? Specifically, can she travel overseas to be with family while she faces her loss, etc., or is she bound to the home she shared with her spouse? So the Quran tells us that the waiting period for the woman after she loses her husband, after her husband passes, is 4 months and 10 days. Arba'ata ashhurin wa ashar. And the iddah period is something that is legislated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, thank you, is legislated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon women, and in it is a tremendous reward, because the iddah period would even supersede something like Hajj. So for example, if a woman was going to go to Hajj, or she was planning, or she paid money, and the death happens around the Hajj months, even that enormity of that great act would be superseded by the iddah. So no, the woman needs to remain in the marital house, meaning that she needs to spend the night in that marital house. It doesn't mean that she's not allowed to leave the house, but the iddah period means that where the family was, where the life of the husband and wife took place, that she will remain in that house, meaning that she will spend the night in that house. She can leave the house during the day as is required if she's working, or to buy food or medicine and things like that. What if the lady whose husband passes is ill or is unable to do that? Then after the death occurs, she can move right away to a relative's house, a child's house, and then perform the iddah period there. But traveling to be with family, as this is, it should be the other way around. People should come to her. And the fuqaha remind us that in the iddah, as I said, is this tremendous reward for the lady. So we should not think of it as something that is limiting, but rather we should think of it as an opportunity for the reward. The next question actually, the reward is for the wife. The dead person died. It's over. Right? So this is the reward for the wife. Inshallah, hopefully, if he was a good man, she can make dua for him, and then he will get the reward. But no, this is specifically a reward for the wife or for the widow. She can go back if there's a need, like a medical need or something like that. But if she's physically able to, she should remain in the marital house. And then people can come to her, as I said. But if she's unable to take care of herself, then of course she can move to a place where she can take care of. So for example, one of the functions that the masjid can have in the West is that if we have space, or we have rooms, or we can accommodate that people that are not able to live on their own, that would be a possibility. The iddah starts after the husband is, right when the husband passes. Yeah. No. She can attend. The iddah doesn't mean she's trapped in the house. It means that when she sleeps at night, she needs to return to that house. No, so she can participate in the funeral, and she can go to the burial and all of that. It applies to any woman whose husband has died. No, not if she is able to stay and be on her own. And I don't advocate sending the body to another country. The sunnah is that the person is buried where they die. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, whoever dies in a non-Muslim lands, dies a shaheed, وَلَوْ كَانَ فَاسِق, even if he is a fasiq. So there is great reward in living your Islam as a minority community and dying. And we have enough facilities that this is our little dot in Islam. So we don't need to send the bodies back. I don't advocate for that. Any more questions? Okay. No. So sending the body to different places to be buried is just not the full sunnah, let's say. It's not necessarily haram, but I mean, it's not haram at all, but it's not the full sunnah. The sunnah is that, we're buried right away. Let's say that there's a prominent Muslim figure or head of state and they die somewhere, and then the king of Saudi Arabia says, oh, we offer to have him buried in Medina. Well, I mean, obviously we should take him up on that offer. That's a great opportunity to be buried amongst the Sahaba and the Baqiyah. So that might involve the body traveling and whatnot. So there are circumstances, and these are examples that we have seen. But somebody's traveling. Let's say I'm just traveling on vacation or for work, and I die in another country. I'm probably not going to be buried there. They're probably going to have to arrange with the embassy to send me back to my origin country. So there are circumstances in which that has to happen, and the Sharia allows that. I'm just saying for families that live here, we need to also feel that this is our home. And if this is our home, then this is where we're going to be buried. And we have the facilities for that. Land where my fathers die, land of thy pilgrim's pride. Let freedom ring. Anything else about the iddah, death? Okay. The next is a longer question about divorce. So I'm just going to read all the parts together and then we can talk about them. Is it a valid ground to get a divorce due to one spouse continuously and repeatedly denying the marital rights of their partner? I'm assuming that this is involved to intimacy. This obviously is not due to any valid justifiable reason like health or the cases of occasional instances, but rather revolving excuses. Many people tend to shy away from this topic, but it could lead to destruction of marriages one way or another. To avoid seeking a haram route like an extramarital affair, etc. Is it a valid divorce reason if communications and options have been exhausted? When people, for some reason, when we talk about marriage, we always talk about rights. And if you base your marriage based on legal definitions, I doubt that you're going to have a very fruitful marriage, because marriage is supposed to be based on love and mercy. وَجَعَلْنَا بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. Allah says, we created between you love and mercy. Of course, the rules are there. We have those rules because there has to be a way to answer these questions. And if there's a problem, we have to mitigate the problem. But when people start to talk about what's my right, what's her right, it's not a business transaction. It's not a business contract. So we need to rethink that. That being said, the sexual act is an integral part of marriage, because the sexual act, its default is that it's haram, and then it is the marriage contract that makes it halal. So obviously it's part of marriage. But the sexual act is not by itself. There are other forms of intimacy in a marriage. So when people talk about, I'm deducing from the question, maybe this is not exactly what the question is, but let's say people come and they're saying, we're not sexually active, and one partner is refusing that towards the other partner, etc. It's not just the act. There are things around the act that we also need to discuss. So intimacy is much larger than just sex. So there has to be that intimacy, there has to be that compassion, there has to be that mercy throughout the relationship. When that starts to break down, not now, but very shortly thereafter, this is when these type of things happen. If one partner denies the sexual intimacy towards the other partner for no reason, yes, it's a divorceable offense, because this is something that is the right of each partner. It is a protection. That is why Allah Ta'ala created marriage. That's why Allah Ta'ala created these type of feelings that we have, etc. Any harm from the man towards the woman is a divorceable offense. And harm is defined as physical harm, verbal harm, psychological harm, emotional harm. وَتُطْلَقْ الْمَرْأَةِ بِالضَّرَرِ. The books of the Maliki fiqh say the woman is divorced by any harm that befalls her. And they'll say, even if the man curses at his wife and says, you daughter of a so-and-so, or Araku, you SOB, or something like that. Even if he said that, and she went to the Qadi, this would be a divorceable offense. Now that's the legal definition. But when somebody comes to me, for example, and they have these problems, my role is to try to reconcile. وَالصُّلْحُ خَيْرٌ, Allah says, and reconciling is better. If we can reconcile, especially if there are children that are involved. If people come to me and they say, I can't stand her and I can't stand him, and they start yelling, which is unfortunate, has happened even in this masjid, but in the basement, alhamdulillah. One time I had to kick somebody out of the mosque because it was just the yelling was too much. Then, okay, in my mind, I'm like, well, clearly they're going to have to get divorced because there's no way to reconcile if they're yelling at each other. In that case, that's fine. And the questioner says, avoiding things like extramarital affairs, of course, that's haram. And that's from the big sins, the major sins from the kaba'ir. So, abghadul halal and Allah at-talaq. The most disliked of the halal acts with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is divorce, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. So if that's the end result, then you can get divorced, and that's fine. My advice is to try to seek reconciliation and to try to find out what's going on, because I think that it's deeper than simply the sexual act is not taking place. There might be something else that's going on. Okay. Are there any verses in the Quran or prophetic sayings that mention women rights? There are too many to mention. The Prophet ﷺ said, "An-nisa'u shaqa'iqu rijal," that women are the partners of men. Yani ash-shaq is like the other half of men. I mean, that's a huge statement. Even though it's only a few words, the Prophet ﷺ saying is that women are the partners of men. And if you read the life of the companions, and if you read the life specifically of the Prophet ﷺ as he was with his wives, you see that the Prophet ﷺ asked his wives advice all the time. And they used to opine, and they used to argue, and they used to learn, and they used to teach. Sayyidah Fatima alayhi salam was a mufti. And people would come to her after the passing of Rasulullah ﷺ to learn their deen. And one of the wisdoms that the Prophet ﷺ married Sayyidah Aisha at such a young age is that she grew up from a very young age in the house of the Prophet ﷺ. So she had all of this fiqh, and then her life was extended way past the life of the Prophet ﷺ. So she narrated on his behalf, and she taught the ummah. The women of the Sahaba fought in the battles with the companions. They took the defense of Medina, and they defended. In one instance, during the battle of the Khandaq, I can't remember, I think it was one of the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, maybe Habiba alayhi salam. I can't remember who exactly, but women and children were like in this fortress that had the surplus, some of the supplies of Medina, and they saw that some of the Quraysh were nearby, and Hassan ibn Thabit radiallahu, the poet, was with them. So she said, go down, Hassan, and kill this guy. And Hassan's like, I can't. Hassan is a poet, artist person. He's like, that's not for me. She went down and she killed him. And she protected all of the women and all of the children and all of the supplies. An-nisa'u shaqa'iqu rijal. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says something very interesting in the Quran. He says, وَلَا تَتَمَنَّوْا مَا فَضَّلَ اللَّهُ بِهِ بَعْضُكُمْ عَنْ بَعْضٍ لِلرِّجَالِ نَصِيبٌ مِّمَّا اكْتَسَبُوا وَلِلنِّسَاءِ نَصِيبٌ مِّمَّا اكْتَسَبْنَ وَلِكُلٍّ وَعَدَ اللَّهُ الْحُسْنَى وَاسْأَلُوا اللَّهَ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do not seek what I have given to the other. To the man is their reward for what they have earned, and for the woman is her reward for what she has done, and in both of them is good. So ask from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is there any way to make this thing stop echoing? It's the volume is off. Every time and it's on mute and everything. Not only do I have to see myself on delay, but then I hear myself, it's driving me crazy. Turn it off? Yeah, okay. No, if somebody, I can't. It's driving me insane. It's driving me insane. So in this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that He has given special things to men and He has given special things to women. So the man is proud that he's a man and cherishes that and lives up to that. And the woman is proud that she's a woman and she cherishes that and lives up to that. And one of the signs of Yawm al-Qiyamah is that men try to be like women and women try to be like men. Men dress like women and women dress like men. This is why, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala this is one of the things that Allah ta'ala created us in, like Allah created us in time. Allah's not going to come and say, why did you live in the 2000s? There's no taklif. We have no hawl aw quwwah. This is when Allah decided us to exist. He didn't want us to exist at the time of the Sahaba. One of the things that we have been created with is also our gender. Allah's not going to come Yawm al-Qiyamah and says, why aren't you a woman? Why aren't you a man? We're not responsible for that. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created each one of us spiritually the same. We have the same spiritual function towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah rewards the man like He rewards the woman. He rewards the woman like He rewards the man. But we have different functions in society. Sometimes those functions overlap and sometimes those functions don't overlap. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praises both the man and both the woman. Furthermore, there are some people who are only referred to by their women, by their mother, like Isa alayhi salam, Isa ibn Maryam. And there's a whole chapter for Maryam alayhi salam in the Quran. And when in Surah Al-Maryam, when the story is being narrated of Mary alayhi salam, what does she say? Inni wada'tuha untha wa laysat dhakari kal untha. She had wanted to dedicate the child for the service of the temple, assuming that it was going to be a boy. And then she finds out that she's giving birth to a girl, and she says, but the boy is not like the girl. The Mufassirun, they say that this is an indication that the girl has a special quality that the boy does not have, which we know, because from the woman comes life itself. Life can't come from us, it only can come from the woman. So this verse actually is a praise of the girl in the idea of Mary. Later in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِمْرَأَةَ فِرْعَوْنَ إِذْ قَالَتْ رَبِّ ابْنِ لِي عِندَكَ بَيْتًا فِي الْجَنَّةِ وَنَجِّنِي مِنْ فِرْعَوْنَ وَعَمَلِهِ وَنَجِّنِي مِنَ الْقَوْمِ الظَّالِمِينَ. Allah says, I gave as an example to all believers, Asya, the wife of Pharaoh, that she asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for protection and for paradise. And then the verse after that, وَمَرْيَمَ ابْنَةَ عَمْرَانَ الَّتِي أَحْسَنَتْ فَرْجَهَا فَنَفَخْنَا فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِنَا فَصَدَّقَتْ بِكَلِمَاتِ رَبِّهَا وَكُتُبِهِ وَكَانَتْ مِنَ الْقَانِتِينَ. And then Allah also gives Mary as an example for all the believers who protected her chastity, and that Allah Ta'ala blew into her the spirit, which was Christ, etc., etc. So Allah Ta'ala in these verses say, I'm giving all of humanity, all believers, an example. Who are these examples? They're two women. So this idea that the man is somehow better than the woman or something like that, we really don't have that in Islam. And in early Islam, that wasn't really an issue. In the early generation, the generation of the early Salaf, it wasn't like that. The women were, just the other day I was reading this hadith in Muslim. The wording I forget, but a woman stood in the mosque and the narrator described her cheeks because she had the face of somebody who was involved in manual labor. And unfortunately, the narration escapes me. What does that mean? That means that her face wasn't covered. How could the narrator describe how her face looked if her face was covered? So that means her face was not covered with niqab. But not just that, that's just a side point. Not just that, but then she stood up, right? And she starts talking in the masjid, meaning that she's, engaging. There's also the famous, the aunt of the Prophet, Harb. Harb, the Prophet ﷺ was in her house one day, and he woke up and he laughed. And she said, why are you laughing? And he said, I saw a vision that my community will go out onto the seas. And he praised the people that will go out and fight fi sabilillah on the seas. So she says, I want to be amongst them. And he says, inshallah, you'll be amongst them. So what happens with Harb later in the seerah, and later in history, after the passing of the Prophet during the Khilaf of Muawiyah, she goes out onto the Mediterranean, and they go to Cyprus, and she dies as she lands, and she's buried in Cyprus. The mosque of Harb is in Cyprus, one of the companions. And this is like something of praise. This is not, this story that I'm telling you is in Tirmidhi, it's in Muslim. It's not like a side history story. This is in our collections of hadith. So no, later, for many reasons, usually men mess things up. That's probably what happened. And things became very patriarchal. And women ended up being confined to the homes and not leaving the homes and so on and so forth. Well, that was cultural, not religious. And up until probably the early 1800s in most Muslim majority regions, that's how women were. So we inherit some of that and we think that this is Islam. And then we start giving it a justification. But if you look at the Quran and the Sunnah, and if you look at the Salaf, the early Salaf and how they lived, no, there was no difference. I mean, there's differences, of course, but I meant there's no one gender is better than another gender. Allah praises both, Allah compensates both, and both should be proud of the gender that they have been given. As far as the rights are concerned, if your question is, are there rights involved, for example, in marriage? Yeah, of course, there are many hadith that talk about the rights. It's very, very simple. The woman only has to do like two things, which is she has to keep the secrets of the house, and she cannot deny intimacy for no reason. That's about it. Everything else the man has to do. The man has to provide food, the man has to provide clothes, the man has to provide shelter, the man has to provide this, the man has to provide that, meaning he has to pay. And that's why Allah says, وَلِلْرِجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةٌ. Men have a degree over women, a degree of responsibility. The woman doesn't have to cook, she doesn't have to clean, she doesn't have to do anything. The books of fiqh say that if a woman has a bed made of silk and she's sitting on her bed, her husband can sit on the bed with her for her enjoyment. And then when she gets off the bed, he must get off, or else it's haram for him to sit because it's silk. I mean, to what religion teaches this? I mean, tell me, what religion has taught people this type of, even in the books of fiqh, I mean, this is an outdated ruling, but in the books of fiqh, like in the mid-1800s, it will say something like, if a woman is used to using tobacco, then the man must provide her with her tobacco, in addition to all of the things she's used to, because this is something that's new that came. So what does that mean other than the ruling of tobacco has evolved? That means that things that a woman is used to before she gets married, the husband needs to be able to provide those things. So from rules and responsibility, if you want to live your life like that, find the man that's going to do that, and the woman can just sit at home and do nothing. But this is not how we are today. We would reject that kind. If we found a woman like that, the women would be upset. And if we found a man like that, we would be upset. So also these roles, these societal roles have changed, and there's nothing wrong with us changing and adapting with that, because they are under the principles of the Quran and the Sunnah. Okay, another question, another topic altogether. Is it possible that the Buddha is amongst the unknown prophets? Yes, of course. Minhum qasasnahum alayk wa minhum lam naqsusum alayk. Allah Ta'ala has told us about some prophets and not told us about most prophets. So the Anbiya that we know are very, very few compared to all of the prophets that were actually sent. And every community was sent a prophet alayhim as-salam. So our teachers taught us that when we have a question like this, we say, and the Buddha, if he was a prophet, alayhi salam, or if he was a prophet, I'm the first to believe in him. And I believe that he was a prophet, because I mean, it's impossible. It's one of the most populous, most impactful religions, traditions on the face of earth. It's impossible that came out of nothing. And most of these ancient people, ancient religions, come from some kind of wahi. That people didn't just make it up. The things that are made up are those animists and polytheists that you find in different islands or different, tribal areas in Africa. Those are things that are made up. But things like the ancient Egyptians, ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, the Hindic world, and those are all came from religion. If you look at ancient Egyptian stuff and the hieroglyphics and the temple, I mean, that didn't just make that up. That came from something. There was some wahi at some point, and it became distorted, and that's what we believe about all of traditions, all religious traditions. So yes, it's very possible that the Buddha was a prophet. It's very possible that Krishna was a prophet. It was very possible that all of these ancient sages were from the Anbiya. And if they were, alayhim as-salam. No. Yeah, rebirth, reincarnation is a completely fabricated belief. There is no, in the religion of God, it doesn't belong. Because the belief of rebirth negates Yawm al-Qiyamah. And belief in Yawm al-Qiyamah is one of the fundamental things that God came to send the prophets to teach humanity. Aside from Tawheed, there is a hisab. So this idea of reincarnation, yeah, this is completely fabricated. We would say that this was not part of the Buddha's original teaching. And for some reason, it's very popular. Muslims, where was I? Someone was in Virginia last week. Muslims want to believe in this for some reason. It's a really big fitna. Yeah. Yes, Tawheed, but Tawheed also necessitates that there is hisab. Not that we're just sort of going on and on and on. It gets distorted over time in different ways. In the Christian world, it gets distorted with the Trinity. In the Jewish world, it gets distorted through anthropomorphism. In the Dharmic world, it gets distorted through things like karma or dharma and reincarnation. Yeah, so these are just ways, we would say, our critique would be that these are ways of distortion. Islam maintains its pure monotheism because there's also no other religion that has a very pure and clearly articulated monotheism like Islam today. Our monotheism has no anthropomorphism whatsoever. And we have an allergic reaction to anthropomorphism. And that's why all of these big theological debates that inside Muslim sects revolve around, the hand of Allah and Allah sitting on the throne and stuff like that, because we have an allergic reaction if there's anything that's anthropomorphic, because anthropomorphism is one of the ways that the religions before us can become distorted. Yeah, so we don't believe in rebirth and reincarnation. I mean, rebirth in the sense we believe in resurrection, of course, we'll be resurrected. But this idea that there's just this cycle of karma, we don't believe in, and nor would we say that it was part of the original message. Wallahu a'lam. Is sports betting haram? I mean, come on. Yeah, sports betting is haram. We don't bet. We don't gamble. We don't bet. Don't waste your money. And if you have a gambling problem, please call 1-800, whatever the 1-800 number is for the gambling, because it is an addiction and it is a problem. And every time there's an announcement or an advertisement for gambling, they always have to, by law, say, if you have a gambling addiction, go to this website or go to this number. Roman, did you ask this question? Yeah. 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 It is. You're right. It is much more prevalent. When we were growing up, it was not. Yeah, the thing about fun, I mean, I'm sure it's fun, drinking alcohol is fun, and getting high is fun and all that kind of stuff. And I don't think that people do these things with a bad intention. But for us, the level of haram and halal is not about if we're having fun or not. Nor does Allah want us to be miserable either. But the haram is the haram. It's not about how I feel about it. If it's haram, it's haram. And there are other ways that we can entertain ourselves. So betting betting, sports betting, gambling, all that stuff is haram. Cricket, man. There are halal ways of having financial prizes in games and sportsmanships in the Sharia, but it will not look like betting. But it's there can be a prize purse and there has to be a third person involved. There's a whole fiqh about it. So if you guys want, we can talk about that, and we can try to revive that sunnah in the masjid. Are tattoos haram in Islam? Can you pray and go Umrah and Hajj with tattoos? For the Sunnis, the tattoo is haram. Why? Not because of the ink and not because of the design. The tattoo is haram if it involves bringing up the blood from the blood vessel, injecting the ink with the blood, and then re-injecting that back under the dermis of the skin. Because the blood in the Sharia is considered najis. So if I take blood out and then inject it back underneath my skin, i.e. tattoo, then this is like I have this permanent piece of najasa, of ritual impurity on my hand. So it's haram for that reason. But something like henna is not haram if you got like a henna design. Or if there was, I don't really know much about the tattoo world. I know it's a big world and I should know more about it, but I don't. But if there was a way that somebody could just have an ink design without the blood part, it wouldn't be haram. But if it's doubtful that, yeah, we can do the ink, but there's a chance that there can be blood, because of that chance, we would say that it was haram, because it's too much of a high probability or a chance that the najasa can get involved. I believe, but I'm not sure, I haven't verified this, I believe for the Shias, they have a different approach to tattoos. But for us, for all the Sunni schools, it's all haram for the reasons that I've indicated. If somebody feels the urge to do this, I advise you to get a henna. Because there's also the idea of like, what happens if you don't like it after all? I never understand that. Or when you get old, like, have you ever seen an older person, like one of those hippies from the 60s and 50s now, with the tattoos? They gotta be wondering, they gotta be doubting why they did that. I doubt why they're doing that. So I think you should go for the henna route, or temporary tattoos, the sticker tattoo. You remember when we were kids, used to get them bubble gum, used to put them and wet the sponge and stuff like that. Just try it out and then it goes away. But the henna is not haram because it's water soluble, and after a while it goes away, it doesn't involve any blood and things like that. Now, what happens if you have a tattoo? Knowing that it's haram and all of what we just said. Now, what happens if you have a tattoo? Are you supposed to cut your limb off? No. Halas, you have to live with it and ask Allah for tawbah, and Allah will forgive you, inshallah. And there's a principle in usul al-fiqh that Allah Ta'ala forgives what is continually done in error, but He does not forgive in the first instance. Meaning that when you first engage in the act, you have to make tawbah from that. But now it's on me, it's continuously there. Does that mean at every second I'm receiving a sin? No, inshallah, Allah is merciful and can forgive. So in this case, if you have a tattoo, you still can you have to go to Hajj, because it's an obligation if you're financially and physically able. What happens if you're not Muslim and you're all tattooed and then you become a Muslim? It's the same thing. You'll be forgiven for that. And that will be excused. So on and so forth. But really, really caution for, not other than the haram aspect, I really caution against the tattoo thing. It's again another thing, like the sports betting, it's becoming very popular, tattoos. And it's becoming very popular in the Muslim world too. So people will get a tattoo like their name in Arabic. And then there are these people that go to the Arab world to get Arabic tattoos. And then the tattoo artist messes up on purpose. So they say, I want to get like sweetheart, but in Arabic. So the tattoo artist will write ana kalb, I'm a dog, in Arabic. And I've seen these type of things happen. I don't know why I had to say that, but it's just if you put a picture, online. Yeah, it's that would the same concept would happen. Yeah. So sometimes things get out of hand unbeknownst to us. So you have to make tawbah from them and make the effort. Because Allah Ta'ala, the Prophet also said, Man sanna sunnatan sayyah, whoever invents a bad sunnah. gets its sin and the sin of those who act on it. So we also need to be careful. And the tawbah has to occur. Do you need, another question, do you need an imam to be present to give al-khula? Does court divorce end Islamic marriage? This may be an unfair question to you as it is legal. Al-khula is a woman-initiated divorce. And I wish when people translate, they just translate it like that, because there's this false assumption that only men can divorce. There can be all types of divorce, but they're just called different things. A man's initiated divorce is a talaq. A woman's initiated divorce is al-khula. A court-initiated divorce is al-fasakh. So all of those terminate the marriage. Isn't that what a divorce is? So they're just called different things because there are different procedures. So the khula is when the woman wants to go get divorced, she goes to the qadi, she tells the qadi, I want to divorce this man. The qadi grants her the khula, in which case she has to return the mahar to the man. Okay, that's al-khula. So what does the imam, the miskeen imam, what do I have to do with the khula? I'm not a qadi. So no, the khula is a woman-initiated divorce that has to take place in front of the judge. Does the court divorce end the Islamic marriage? The court divorce confirms the Islamic divorce. Just like the court, here I'm talking about the Western civil court, just like the civil court confirms the Islamic marriage. What do I mean by that? So somebody comes to the masjid and they want to get married. So we perform the nikah. Now the nikah in Islam is verbal. The bride makes the offer and then the groom accepts. Why does the bride make the offer? Because the bride has the power of the contract, not the man. So by the woman beginning the contract, or her wali, or her guardian, she controls the contract and the condition of the contracts. That's what people in the West are like, oh, it's so unromantic, and it has nothing to do with romance. This is a contract, and this is how she protects herself. But anyway, so the woman makes an offer based on the mahar and the Quran and the Sunnah, etc., and then the man agrees verbally. And then I come down and I have a piece of paper, and then we write down the nikah and we sign it. This document that we wrote is confirming the marriage that already happened. So where is the real nikah? It's the verbal contract that happens according to the Quran and Sunnah. So the piece of paper, whether it be a piece of paper that we have amongst us in the masjid, or it's the marriage license that they bring to me and then I sign, or Imam al-Rifai signs, or whatever, that is a confirmation of the nikah that took place. So then the reverse is also true. If they want to get divorced, for example, they're going to have to also get divorced civilly, because based on the divorce decision, there will be certain tax implications, distribution of property, custody, so on and so forth, wanting to remarry, all of these things. A man and the woman, they come to me, and the man says, they agree that they're going to get divorced, and the man is going to do the divorce. So I say, okay, tell your wife you are divorced. So he says, you are divorced in English, or he says in Arabic, anti taliq, khalas. The divorce now has taken place. So they're going to go to the court and they're going to confirm it by making the divorce on a piece of paper. Or the opposite. They've agreed that she is the one that is going to be divorcing him, a khula, in which case she has to return the mahar, whatever the mahar amount was. They're going to go to court and they're going to sign the divorce. Now, of course, this is theoretical, because when people get divorced, they never do anything together. They want to fight and they want to kick and they want to scream and they want to destroy each other and they want to bury each other alive and all of these type of things. That's another issue altogether. But what happens vis-a-vis the question? This is what happened. Wallahi, a couple came to me. I'm not going to tell you who they are. A couple came to me many years ago, the masjid, and they there was a divorce. Being naive, I tried to reconcile. The minute I even mentioned reconcile, I made them even more mad. I wish I never even said that word. They started, I said, maybe there's a 1% chance that no, not even 0.001. I was like, okay, I'm sorry. So I had an individual conversation with each of them. He told me what he provided with the mahar and financial situation. And then she told me privately her version. And I reconciled the numbers and I came up this was going to be him divorcing her. And I came up with what I thought was a fair settlement according to the Sharia. The settlement that I offered, it happened to be what he wanted. And she thought that this is, I'm a man and I'm siding with the man and blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to go to court, and in America, I get 50%. I said, yes, but you understand that 50% of nothing is nothing. So you think you're going to get 50%. This is not Bill Gates that you're divorcing. They went to court, and my rule is when people come to me for marriage, divorce, etc., no lawyers involved. No disrespect to any of the lawyers. If anybody goes to a lawyer, I'm out. I have nothing to do with it whatsoever. Nor do I get involved in the courts, because I believe that this is all a big scam. This whole marriage, divorce, lawyer thing. They just think about it. The lawyer, no offense to Imam Rifai, not Imam Rifai, everyone except Imam Rifai. The lawyer is one of the few jobs that you still get paid when you're wrong, and you still get paid when you lose. Think about that. It doesn't matter which side wins, you're still gonna have to pay the lawyer. Haram, all of the money. Look what happened. They both went, she went to a lawyer, so he had to get a lawyer, and they duked it out in court for over a year. And they spent combined something like $150,000, almost $200,000 in legal fees. And at the end of the day, the judge ruled exactly with what I said a year ago, and I didn't get paid a cent. And it turned out that she was legally still married to her previous husband in another state. So she was found guilty of bigamy. It was a very big, sort of scandalous type of situation. So unfortunately, my point is in telling you the story, unfortunately, that when people come and they want to get divorced, they really don't, they're fed up with each other. And they think that if they go to the courts, each person is going to get their right. And I'm telling you, it doesn't happen like that. Haram that you waste all of this money. We are more than happy to help you settle the situation in a respectable way, but we have clear guidelines. So to come back to the question, if somebody gets divorced in the courts, yes, this is a cessation of the divorce Islamically, because the Islamic divorce happens verbally, just like the contract of marriage happens verbally. Well, I can try. Okay. Do you need a witness for the divorce? A very good question. You don't need a witness for the divorce Islamically, but now most Muslim majority countries are introducing this as part of the law because there is too much confusion that happens. So I would say for us, yes. Like we have two witnesses for the marriage contract, we have to have two witnesses for the divorce. I don't, yeah.
Can you give us the Islamic view of will and how it should be done?
Islamic view of will? Yeah, we might as well just say, can you teach us about Islam? I mean, that's a huge question. Islamic wills, well, there's a couple of things I will say in the beginning. What is the percentages or the fractions of the distribution of wealth that's laid out in the Quran and the Sunnah? This is for wealth that is not claimed during somebody's lifetime. So let's say I'm leaving the mosque and I get in a car accident and I die. So whatever I have lying around, that money, that little money has to be given to my wife and my sons and my daughters according to the percentages. But let's say in my lifetime, I gave a gift to my son, or I gave a gift to my daughter, or I gave something, or I wrote this piece of property in my wife's name. This is not part of the will because this is a transaction that's taken place. As far as the will is concerned, it depends on who the descendants are. So each situation is different. You have to see who is, if it's a married couple, so on and so forth, how many children there are there any relatives that are left? And then we would have to determine it based on that. The will in America is not necessarily the will in Islam. That's also another thing. So the will in America is something that actually comes later, after the death process. The will that we're thinking about is what happens with the money and how it's distributed. So my advice is that you should sit down with a estate planner, or you can find a simple will online if you're young, but there should be a will that dictates how you want your wealth to be distributed, because if you don't do that, you can be taxed and the money can end up getting lost through the American system, because in every state, they have their own fractions, inheritance distribution fractions that are, I don't even know where they come from, maybe English law or common law or something like that. They have their own fractions and you can be open to being taxed. In the American will, you also need to talk about things like your medical directive, power of attorney to a spouse or to a relative or to somebody in case there are decisions that need to be made at the end. But don't put in your American will how you want to be buried and this and that, because they're going to open this will a month after you die. It's going to be too late. You're going to already be buried. So you need to also arrange with your local Muslim community center or your masjid and understand what the protocols are for burial and washing and janazah and all of that kind of stuff, so that we can handle those things for you.
What is your thought on prenups? Do you recommend couples to do this so that we can have proper mediation in case of conflict, or very least avoid firstly and then do most? What is your thought?
So is the prenup here basically the financial distribution in the case of divorce? Is this what they mean by prenup, Imam Rafai? So by law in this country, the prenup is about finances. By finances in the case of divorce. Yeah, so the prenup, therefore, if as so defined, is basically the mahar and what happens with the mahar. I mean, that's what happens. That is the Islamic contract. So here we're just calling it a prenup. So if people feel that the prenup is a way to protect themselves, then sure. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, because marriage is a contract, and if both parties agree to this as part of the contract, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Because let's say, a couple comes to the masjid and we do the nikah, and I have my little piece of paper and we sign it. This is not going to be enforceable in the court. That's the problem. So what ends up happening is that there are many cases in which one party takes advantage of another. And the woman usually is the one that doesn't, get her rights protected. So in this case, there's nothing wrong with that. What do you mean by not children? Do some people want to include things about children in the prenup? Do you mean custody? Okay. Sure, but yeah, but I'm just trying to understand the prenup thing. So, of course, what I said is right. I know you don't have to tell me that. No, I'm just kidding. Because we were just talking about prenup, I think, last night. You were mentioning it to me. Okay, so in my will, I'm going to say that 50% of my estate goes to ICCP. This is called a wasiyah, which is a bequest. In the Sharia, the bequest can only be 1/3 of the estate. If it is to exceed 1/3 of the estate, then it must include the permission of all of the people that we're going to inherit. So if I get, all my children and my wife together and I say, I want, when I die, 50% of everything to come to ICCP. So Riel can, do with it what he sees fit. And they're like, yes, we love ICCP, we're fine, then I can do that. 1/3 without anyone's permission. If it's going to exceed 1/3, it needs to include the permission and the affirmation of those who would inherit. That's a good question. Well, the court will recognize it if we've drafted in a legal will. So we should do that. And this would be a wonderful thing if we find an estate lawyer that the community can work with, and we have like a workshop. I went to one several years ago, and it was very, very beneficial. And at least in the state of Maryland, there are many options and there are many protections, and you can put a whole host of things in your will. you'd be surprised. It's very, very interesting. So I highly recommend that we think of a community of doing that. It'd be great if we find a Muslim estate lawyer too. Maybe there'll be more understanding. There is in our community? Awesome. Yeah, okay, we could do it together, but I meant because at the end of the day, whatever I'm saying, you need to take this and go to a lawyer and make a legal instrument. So we need a lawyer at some point in time to do it.
My question is that other books of religion, like the Bible or the Talmud, are there no any references to the Bible, proper Bible, and
I know in the Talmudic law there is clear or not, there is a discussion of percentages. In the Gospels, in the Christian Bible, there is no reference. So that would probably be in canon law. I don't know. The canon law, I believe, is taken from Justinian law, which was the ancient Roman legal system, and I think they added to that. So in the Judeo-Christian world, I think the Jews probably have more to say about it than the Christians. And for us, yes, it's actually considered its own discipline. Even if you study fiqh, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to study inheritance law. Inheritance law is very complicated and it's very mathematical and not very complicated, but it's its own discipline. Was there something else from online? Okay. Well, I have this up now, so. Okay, I'm a Muslim. Another question. I'm a Muslim born and bred in North Africa, the Middle East. I got married overseas under Islamic law. I now live in North America. With the permission of my first wife, I decided to take a second wife and got married under Islamic law. I have an open relationship with both my wives. Don't say open relationship because that means something else in the context today. I have an open relationship with both my wives and we coexist. Given that I live in North America and laws here are different, would Islamic law take precedence? So you got married to a second wife in another country, Muslim majority country, let's say, with the knowledge or acknowledgement or permission of your first wife. So that means that second marriage, there's no question marks about the validity of that second marriage. So the second marriage is valid, and you owe that wife the rights that are owed to her, like you owe to the first wife, that you have to split the resources, so on and so forth. But what you're not going to be able to do is you're not going to be able to bring that second wife to America as your second wife. And that is where the problem emerges. So living in this country only, if you're not living between two countries, living in this country only and having for a man having more than one wife, it's not going to work, because bigamy, being married to more than one person in this country, is a crime. And if I marry a second wife or a third wife here in this country, and she is here in this country, I have already harmed this second and third wife or fourth wife, because there are fewer legal protections for her than there are for my actual wife. Financial legal protections that she doesn't have, maintenance legal protection, if the kids are involved, inheritance, nasab, so on and so. If I wanted to get away from those things, I could easily. And that's why I do not advocate, or even I would go as far as to say, except in very rare circumstances, I would not think it's permissible in this country to be married more than to one wife, even if it's with people's permission. There are circumstances in certain communities in this country, widows, inner city situations, where I understand that polygamy is very common and can solve the problem, but I would still try to find other solutions. But that's my own opinion. It's not necessarily the Sharia's opinion. As far as getting back to the question, Given that I live in North America and the laws here, would Islamic law take precedence? Well, I mean, it depends what the question is really about. Are you asking, was the marriage correct? The marriage was correct. There's nothing wrong with that. You haven't engaged in anything wrong. Can you bring this other wife here? No, you're not going to be able to bring her as your wife. And if you bring her not as your wife, but as, let's say she has a green card or a citizenship and she comes here, then you're going to start to get into this difficult situation where you are harming her without her knowing about it because you haven't given her those protections. Because the default understanding of the contract is that the man is going to protect the wife, assume certain responsibility in the marriage contract, and assume certain responsibilities. So the marriage is fine. You have the Sharia obligations. You've done nothing wrong, but you have to make sure that you maintain the rights and the protection of both wives, is what I would say. Oh, somebody meant on the group chat, somebody said, Noreen Rahman is an attorney who does estate planning. She's part of the community. MillenniumAttorney.com. So for those are on Zoom, the link for the lawyer is there. Okay. The last question I have on the paper, but of course, if there are other questions, you can take them. There was an announcement at Jummah that 2 ICCP youth graduated as Hafiz of Quran. Can you please explain what it takes to achieve this and the benefits? In this day and age, this is a sacrifice from other studies. How does one, from your experience, balance these objectives? And the 2 youth are of Ethiopian origin. And you've mentioned this previously in your Seerah series. Please recount these for our benefits. Okay, so memorizing the Quran basically entails learning how to recite the verses of the Quran according to the rules of tajweed, which is not so difficult because there are many repeated words and phrases in the Quran. And once you kind of get going, you kind of know how things are supposed to sound. And then you got to sit your butt down and memorize the Quran. So you probably memorize a page a day. And if you go with the Mus'haf, the Medina Mus'haf, it will probably take you about a year and 8 to 10 months, a little less than 2 years to memorize the entire Quran if you memorize a page a day. And of course, the most difficult thing about memorizing is not memorizing, but it's about reviewing. Because you start memorizing boom, 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 and then you go back to review. The Shaykh says, well, let me hear from the beginning. You're like, so you have to go back. And it just requires that time and that purity of intention. Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنِ لِلذِّكْرِ فَهَلْ مِن مُدَّكِرٍ. Allah Ta'ala says that we have made the Quran easy to be remembered and to be memorized, but who is there to reflect upon this? So it requires a pure intention, and it's doable. And millions of people before us, from the time of the Prophet to our times, have memorized the Quran. Most people that memorize the Quran are non-Arabs, might not even understand the verses of the Quran, their full meaning, but they have retained within their hearts the Quran. Of course, memorizing the Quran is a great act in itself, because it is one of the signs of the veracity of the Quran, that it's easy to memorize, that it's easy to be held in someone's memory. And it is a protection for that person in this dunya and in the hereafter. And it's also protection and forgiveness for many of their relatives, that they will be able to intercede on their behalf on Yawm al-Qiyamah. So, mashallah, may Allah Ta'ala make them firm, and may He make our memorization and our dedication to the Quran firm as well. The idea, what happens when you start memorizing the Quran, is that you just start living this, relationship with the Quran, that you're always turning to it, you're always thinking of a passage, you're always going back to review, you're trying out something new. You find somebody, so can you listen, can you take the Mus'haf and just, I want to read this surah to you, or this juz, can you just correct me if I forget? And you have a relationship with the Quran. It becomes something that's very special to you, that you're always going back to it, you're always reading it. And mashallah, as far as balance and so on and so forth, I mean, who cares about the balance? Just take 2 years and do it. There's nothing wrong with that. Do we live a balanced life? No, we spend too much time doing this, too much time doing that. So memorizing the Quran actually doesn't take that much time. It's just about dedication, that every day I'm going to do this. Because you're not going to sit down and for 6-7 hours be reading the Quran. You're going to memorize a little, then review a little, then you have to go out, do something else. And then, there's only so much that you can humanly do in one day. So you probably will be spending 2 to 4 hours per day doing that. If you don't know any Arabic or how to read the Quran, it might take you longer in the beginning because you need to know those parts as well. But what you really need to do is just sit down and dedicate the time to doing it. As far as balance and studies, the kids are back and now they're in school. They're fine. And so what's a year or two extra in their academic journey? They were able to pick up the Quran along the way. It was worth it. So don't look at it as a balance and this and that. Look at it that I have the opportunity to do something great and I'm going to do it. Are there any Ethiopia? Well, yes. So the technique of memorizing is that in Al-Bayhaqi, there's a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ says, if you memorize the Quran 5 by 5, you will not forget. So when they came to print the Quran in the modern world, they printed the page of the Quran to have 15 lines. And this is from the Ottomans. The Ottomans are the ones that used to write the handwritten Quran. They used to write it in this way, that each page would begin with a verse and end with a verse, and each page would have 15 lines, other than the page that has the transition from the surahs, because the surah title might make it less. Of course, the first two pages, the Fatiha and the first 5 verses of Baqarah, are typically by themselves. And then the last page will have Al-Ikhlas, Al-Falaq, and Al-Nas, so there's more space given to that. But basically, all of the other pages are 15. So where did the 15 come from? It came from this hadith, that this is how the Quran should be memorized. So if you memorize a page a day, or if you build up to being able to memorize a page a day, the page is 15 lines. So you can start by doing the first 5 lines, and then 5 and 5 to 10, and then adding another 5, 15. Of course, it might not exactly be 5, because maybe you need to get to the 6th line for the ayah, because the ayah might cross over to a line. But in general, that's the philosophy, or not the philosophy, but that's the idea behind it. One way is to just read from the beginning to the end over and over and over and over again. One way is to memorize the first verse, then memorize the second verse and recite them together, then memorize the third verse and then recite them. There are different ways of doing it. But the bottom line, the upshot, is any type of memorization requires repetition. So whether you read the whole page over and over, or whether you go verse by verse, the idea is you have to repeat. And then after you've locked in the memory today, you're going to have to recall it in the coming days, so you have to review. So people that memorize the Quran or are in the process of memorizing the Quran, they'll probably tell you that they spend more time reviewing than they do memorizing, or at some point they'll spend more time reviewing. And then the people that finish the Quran, they have to continue to review it, so they're going to review between 3 and 5 juz per day. Because if they've memorized it, it's quick. Each juz will probably take 15 to 20 minutes. So within an hour to an hour and a half, they can easily read between 3 and 5 juz every day. And you need that kind of volume to be able to go through it over and over again, but it becomes easy. And then, mashallah, you're finishing the Quran every 10 days or every week to 10 days, so on and so forth. So in a person's life, it wouldn't be far-fetched to say that they read the Quran 1,000 to 2,000 times in their life in that way. If somebody's asking about memorization classes at ICCP for adults or tajweed classes, that's Anis's department. So Anis has his class. You should reach out to Anis. Now that he's back, he can tell you what the classes are. The questioner also asked about Ethiopia, because the 2 young men, may Allah bless them and bless their parents, they're from Ethiopia. Ethiopia is the place of the first hijrah, right? The first migration took place, the first 2 migrations took place to Abyssinia, and the companions went at the time of Mecca, when the Muslims were persecuted in Mecca, and the Prophet ﷺ said, go to Al-Habash, to Abyssinia, because there is a righteous king who does not harm anyone. No one is unjustly treated. And the Negus of Abyssinia, the Najashi, he receives the Sahaba and he intercedes in the conflict, because the Quraysh also came with the Sahaba to try to dissuade the Najashi from taking them. And the Najashi, upon hearing what Islam teaches about Christ and Mary, etc., alayhim salam, he accepted them. And later on, that particular Najashi ends up becoming Muslim. And when he passed away, the Prophet ﷺ prayed the janazah prayer, absent janazah prayer on him in Medina. But in the time when the Muslims lived in Abyssinia in the very beginning under that particular Najashi, the Najashi's kingdom was attacked. And the Muslims that lived in Abyssinia fought with the Najashi in the army of the Najashi to repel the enemy. And Zubayr ibn Awam radiallahu anhu was awarded, he was given a spear as an award for his valor in battle. And this is a very important episode in the seerah because it teaches us how to live as a protected minority in a non-Muslim majority, which is for us and most people that live in the West, this is our model. Love of the homeland, participation in the defense of the homeland, obeying of the laws, so on and so forth. Life was so good for the Muslims in Abyssinia that many of them did not leave. Even after the Prophet ﷺ migrated from Mecca to Medina, there were still companions that remained. Companions were born there, or they had children there, rather. And the Muslim community in Ethiopia today, many of them can trace their lineage all the way back to that early community. The Prophet ﷺ spoke some words of the Aramharic at the time, or whatever was the common language at the time. He received gifts from the Najashi. He was given a donkey. He was given, I think clothes, socks, leather socks, so on and so forth. So there was good relationship between the Prophet ﷺ and the people of Abyssinia, and the Ethiopian people, for that reason, have a special place in our hearts for housing and taking the first group of persecuted Muslims. A question online, one of the Jummah khutbahs was about seeking knowledge. Do you have any advice about sequencing this for someone who wants to consolidate his knowledge in a structured way? Well, from the person who asked the question, I think they're a scientist or a data scientist. We have three big buckets. We have the Islam, Iman, and Ihsan. So we have the Sharia related sciences, we have belief, and we have ethics. So one way is to help drop knowledge in each of those buckets in equal amounts. If you don't know anything, for example, to make sure that you have a little bit of knowledge of how you practice your faith, have a little bit of knowledge of the kind of things that constitute faith, and then have some ethical principles, so on and so forth. And I think that if you come to the masjid frequently, and we have enough content on our YouTube channel, that if you consume these things for the next year, if you watch the video a day or something like that, you probably will have a good basic understanding of the deen, because we've talked about a lot of stuff over the last 8, 9, 10 years at the masjid, and especially during COVID when everything was recorded and we really started paying attention with the YouTube channel. I myself have taught entire books, multiple books that are all recorded on YouTube, and you can you can buy these books from Amazon. It's going to cost you less than $100 to buy all the books that I taught. And I mean, I'm just saying what I've done, not to mention Tarif before me and now Imam al-Rifai, many lectures on tafsir. We've had one-off topics on different topics, so on and so forth. So I've taught the seerah, the signs of the end of time, the shama'il of Imam al-Tirmidhi about the Prophet ﷺ, the 99 names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Imam al-Ghazali's book, The 40 Principles of Islam. What am I doing now? The 40 Hadith of Imam al-Nawawi now, and a whole host, all of the Jummah khutbahs. So that would be one structure, one way to do it. And if you find our content on the YouTube channel, you'll be able to know what bucket you're plugging in the knowledge in that kind of bucket. That being said, it's probably helpful to have a structure like an Islam 101 or like an intro to Islam approach. On my website, I have a class called The Muslim Mind, which I've tried to do. I think I have 23 or 24 audio lectures, which I tried to answer that question, to give people a framework of how to think about Islam as like 360 degree. Maybe something like that would be helpful, or a book that does that. The Vision of Islam by William Chittick. Ideals and Realities of Islam by Sayyid Hussein Nasr, whom I studied with at university. That's a very good book, Ideals and Realities of Islam. The Vision of Islam is basically a commentary on the Hadith of Gabriel. Those two books are usually the books that I would recommend that people start out with, to give them that kind of framework that they will need to be able to have this sort of structured approach to understanding Islam. Any other questions? Is it Aisha time? Did you say it's at 9? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to end the stream. So everybody online, we love you. Thank you for joining us. We'd like to see you next time. Donate to ICCP. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل أفضل صلاة على أسعد مخلوقاتك سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم عدد معلوماتك ومداد كلماتك كلما ذكرك الذاكرون وغفل عن ذكره الغافلون. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.